filthy, dirty old man. A grimy old man picked his way through piles of rubbish that cluttered up his shop to the counter inches deep in dust. "It's not the faintest use, sir," he told the fastidious customer, who was puckering his nose in disgust at the unwashed boards and the body. "If I wash my hands today, they will be dirty again tomorrow." The customer hurriedly made the purchase which was the excuse for his visit, and dashed from the murky, stinking cavern. Once outside in Leadenhall Street in the old city of London, he gulped in the not-so-fresh air which was like oil of roses by comparison. Curiosity had compelled him, as it had many others, to visit the almost legendary Nathaniel Bentley, London eccentric and miser, who was reputed not to have washed himself for 30 years. All over London his premises were known as the Dirty Warehouse of Leadenhall Street, and he himself answered privately and gladly to the simple, if unsavoury title of Dirty Dick. Notoriety more than avarice urged Dirty Dick to his meanness. Many tourists, he knew, went to London not to see the Queen, but specially to view the dirty warehouse and its equally dirty proprietor. One woman, it was recorded, made the journey from Yorkshire. Most on arrival bought goods, thus proving Nathaniel Bentley's contention that dirt could pay dividends. For him, dirt was the elixir of life. When he died at the ripe age of 74, it was probably from a lack of dirt, for he expired in the balmy country air of a Scottish village, far from the filth and fogs of London. Had he stayed in his filthy den, it was surmised that he might have rivalled old Pa, another dirty old man who lived twice as long and was put in the stocks for incontinence at the age of 105 years old. Strangely enough, women always had a kind word for Dirty Dick. Perhaps it was because of his old-world courtesy, or merely that the women were less discriminating in the good old days. Dick had not always been dirty. Born in 1735, the son of a respectable city merchant, he loved fine clothes, and in his youth affected the latest styles in wigs. He was such a dandy in his peroxided peruke that the girls called him the Beau of Leadenhall Street and languished for his favours. The warehouse, which was to earn its fame from filth, had then been freshly glazed. It was in fact the first glazed hardware shop in London, and was famed accordingly. On his father's death in 1764, Nathaniel felt far too opulent to become a petty trader, and negotiated to sell his glazed business. But here his first streak of meanness came out. His prospective buyer, a Mr. Bliss, could pay only half the sale price, and Nathaniel would not accept security. Instead of selling, he installed a manager named Holiday at the enormous salary of 10 shillings 6pence a week, and departed for Paris. While Holiday managed, Nathaniel holidayed, and his elegant figure became quite the rage in Paris, even in court circles. In 1774, he was specially invited to attend the coronation of that shaky autocrat, Louis XVI, who shook him democratically by the hand. The Beau of Leadenhall Street returned to London flushed with success. In later years few would believe that such an elegant man of fashion could fall so low. As was frequently the case, unrequited love was his undoing. He became engaged to a lady of fashion. The glazed warehouse and the abuting departments were richly decorated. A blue room was suitably furnished as a love bower, and a large chamber was prepared for the wedding breakfast, at which all their fashionable friends would be present. When all was ready, there was a hitch. The exact nature of the tragedy is not recorded, but the lady either died or walked out on him. There was no wedding. From that day the elegant Nathaniel Bentley began to deteriorate into Dirty Dick. He locked up the breakfast room, with its table still groaning under the weight of good things to eat and drink, and let them rot. He put a stop to his travels, his good living, and his frivolities. Mr. Holiday was sent packing, and Mr. Bentley took charge. In his deep gloom he let things go. Dust settled where Holiday had dusted, Spiders gathered undisturbed in corners, and the ordered shelves became disordered. As with his warehouse, so with Nathaniel Bentley. Gloomy and morose, he refused to wash. His clothes became rags, and his neighbours found him turning into a miserly miser. In mild weather, Nathaniel served in his shop in shirt sleeves to save his coat from wear and tear, and as his face, waistcoat, shirt, breeches, etc., are all one colour, wrote a contemporary, his personal appearance and that of the warehouse exactly correspond. For a time, relics of dandy vanity demanded that he wear hair powder, but he flew into a rage when asked sixpence for a powder puff, and made his own from the dried wing of a goose and an old stocking. Then Parliament imposed a tax on hair powder, and he never used a comb again. From then on, horrified neighbours began to call him Dirty Dick. He bought the cheapest cuts from the butcher on the few occasions he was known to eat meat, but usually existed on crusts of bread. When business acquaintances called for a meal, he produced bread and cheese and cheap beer, telling them that this is the best the business we have been transacting will afford. As the years passed, Dirty Dick used the accumulated dust and rubbish as a bed, finding it more comfortable than the bare boards which hitherto served him. Because of his hermit-like existence, people started talking. His mysterious blue room, they told each other, contained the corpses of his countless victims, mainly women. As a result, the street urchins ambushed him on his occasional outings and pelted him with stones. Nathaniel Bentley was so unpopular that he had to call for police protection until he learned to light a candle upstairs before going out, so as to bamboozle his tormentors into thinking he was still at home. After an underpaid servant robbed him of a few pence, Dirty Dick decided to manage on his own. Outside, however, he employed a down-and-out to watch for burglars and to ward off the urchins when he put up the shutters at dusk. When time had healed the wound of love, the dirty warehouse had become an institution, and a profitable one. Dirt thereafter became for him not a penance, but a business. His appalled neighbours offered to paint and whitewash his premises free of charge, if only for the good name of Leadenhall Street, but he refused. His warehouse, he said, was so universally known as the dirty warehouse of Leadenhall Street that his overseas trade, particularly with the Levant, would suffer if it suddenly became clean. Though somewhat lacking in social behaviour, Dirty Dick was a model of business propriety. His goods, it was said, though often wanting in a little polish, are excellent in quality. Finally, in 1802, when his lease expired, the warehouse had become so notorious that the landlord refused to renew the lease. Dick's delaying tactics, however, prevented the new lessee from getting possession until February 1804. It took several months to clean the building of its 30 years of accumulated filth. While repairs were going on, Dirty Dick refused to vacate the ground floor which contained his merchandise. Renovators had to enter the first and second stories by a ladder and the cellar through the coat hole. On the first story they found a rusty spit, unused for years, and a frying pan whose handle was repaired with pegs. The clock was so disguised by dirt as to be much better calculated to inform a spectator how many years' filth it had accumulated than to point out the fleeting hours and minutes. In the dining room the looking-glass and murals could not be distinguished from the walls. A rusty grate was full of mortar blown down from the chimney, and the carpet, except where the corner was turned up, was matted with filth and the colour of the floorboards. Phials of odd-looking bottles containing, according to Dick, enough poison to destroy half London, completed the inventory of the first story. The second story was almost ceiling-high in rubbish, amidst which could be distinguished telescopes, compasses, books, ancient bedsteads, feathers from burst pillows, mildewed bedding, account books belonging to his father, and long idle tools. When ultimately possession of the ground floor was gained, Gold trinkets and other valuables were discovered in hopeless confusion in inches of dirt. From the sale of his stock, Dick should have had enough to live on for the rest of his years in comfort, but his fortune dwindled through robbery and an ill-judged liaison with a lady of easy virtue. Successive landlords found him too grimy to tolerate, and penniless and friendless he left London towards the end of 1809. Wandering aimlessly with his swag, he eventually arrived at the village of Musselburgh in Scotland. He found the country air rather too pure to be healthy and caught a cold. Tramping on to the village of Haddington, he took a turn for the worse and died on December 18th, 1809. Even the worms turned aside at Haddington Cemetery, said the wits, when the local magistrates saved from a pauper's grave the sordid relic of a man who had once shaken hands with a king.